Hey, Fedheads, you're tuned in to another episode of Sharing Our Pairings. This is Sharing Our Pairings, episode 120, Warfighter Tobacco. Goodbye, Surgeon, Part 1. It's the Surgeon Farewell Tour. Sharing Our Pairings is broadcast on cigarfederation.com and broadcast live on Facebook. You can tune in after the show at YouTube. Thanks to all YouTube listeners who had some patience with us a couple weeks ago there. We had some technology issues that took a few days to resolve. Thanks to all our podcast listeners out there, wherever you are stationed in the world, and of course, all our Armed Forces Radio Network listeners. This show seems relevant to you as you're stationed around the world. We talk about a company founded by veterans. I am joined, as always, by my co-host, Tripp. Trent. Trippy, what's going on, buddy?
How you doing, bud?
Seems like it's been a hot minute.
Yeah, it does. I guess you kind of took a week off, I guess, and we didn't have Sharing Our Pairings last week, but we did have Cigar Chat. But you're back
with
for
none
now.
other than Phil Zangi, yeah. The debonair man himself.
Oh yeah, and he's always a great show. I just love talking to that guy. Talked a little boxing. If anybody who's watched the boxing, those 3 big fights that have happened in the last month and a half, listen to that Phil Zangi show and hear his thoughts.
Dropping some knowledge bombs.
Yep, he knows what he's talking about.
Yeah, I was about 7 hours north in Grand Prairie, Alberta, doing a store conversion. We had a store that was sold to a new owner, and that store we were converting over to the new owner. And that was a fun 4 days of 17 hours a day. And anywho, I'm back smoking cigars and pairing as we are wont to do. I mean, that's the whole purpose of this show is drinking, smoking.
Oh yeah,
not always alcohol, but many times.
Most of the time. Most
of the time. So we're smoking something that's new to us, but not new to the market. It's a company, I think, now I'm trying to remember who turned us on Warfighter, because I think there was a few people that said, you got to go talk to these guys in the booth. It's right up your alley. They're all veterans, armed forces veterans, and they started up a cigar company. Got to go talk to them. And I feel like Dave from the Cigar Authority told us. I feel like there was a bunch of manufacturers that told us.
Yeah.
And so they're like, yeah, man, of course. We'll go talk to these guys over at Warfighter. And yeah.
Yeah, it turned out to be, first, a really interesting story. It's 6 veterans who are, I think, 5 out of the 6 are retired. One of them is still active. And they kind of decided that, when you're deployed, smoking a cigar is kind of a getaway. And I mean, I haven't been deployed or anything, but it sounds like really anybody who's deployed has had that moment where it's like, hey, somebody sent us some cigars, and then you sit down, with your team and enjoy a cigar and just kind of have a little bit of time to yourself to kind of relax. And they always really appreciated that. But they felt like they wanted a cigar that was marketed towards those people. So they made it.
And the booth was really cool. It was obviously Armed Forces themed. Mm-hmm. And if they had some footage, Armed Forces footage playing. And if I remember right, I'm sure I'm going to get this wrong, the details wrong, but they got a Best in Booth award. And I think it was Best Small Booth?
I believe so, yeah.
Best Small Booth, yeah.
The small booth is between 1 and 4 booths, which is like slots. Everything is arranged by booths. And, you have anywhere between 1 and 30 or 40 booths, which is just the amount of floor space you're taking up. But small was between 1 and 4. And I think they got Best New Small Booth.
And I mean, going into the booth, I think they had a really nice design where it was sort of a half crescent, if you will. They had sections, but it wasn't blocked off, so it had a more open feel. And I think when you have a more open feel at the IPCPR especially, I think that gives your booth a feeling of being much bigger than it is, because they call it a small booth. I don't know that it really felt that small to me. I mean, it was pretty packed. They had a lot of product on display. Credit to them. I mean, they hopped, we walked in the booth and they were like right on top of us talking. So, I know we walked into a few booths in the IPCPR and the reaction was maybe a little delayed. Definitely not the case at Warfighter Tobacco.
Yeah, and they're not a super new they're very new in terms of cigars. And this was their first show, but they've been around for about a year. Well, actually, about a year and 3 months now that the IPCPR is 3 months ago. And they started off as just a direct-to-consumer site where they would buy a batch of cigars, they would sell out on their website, buy a batch of cigars, and then now they've kind of got the pipeline for actual cigar production, and they're working on getting into B&Ms now.
And I think they don't know, but being in the industry, you're not supposed to respond to emails right away. When someone sends an inquiry to you, you're supposed to take a day or two, maybe a week to get back. So these guys really got to work on it, because you sent them an email before the show just to clarify some details, and they were back to you right away. So if the Warfighter guys that tune in, you got to cut that out. Like you gotta wait like 2 days to respond. You got to be super busy.
Yeah,
I'm just kidding.
They're gonna mess up expectations for everybody.
Yeah, can't do that. You gotta keep the expectations low. Exceed the expectations, but keep the expectations low. Now we are smoking. Now I guess so. This is my first Warfighter. Have you smoked any of the Warfighters from the show?
No, this is my first one too.
Okay. So I'm just kind of monitoring the rain output here to see whether I need to cover my laptop. I'm kind of getting sprinkled on here. So in the interest of not short-circuiting electronics, I think I might have to deploy some rain protection, as they say. So we're both smoking the Garrison, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
The Garrison 556. So they
556.
They have basically 6 different blends. They have 2 lines. So their first line is the Field, which I don't have one here with me. But they've got kind of a simple brown and tan band that has this kind of logo on it. And then on the side, it says which blend it is, which, gun guys are going to think this is cool. I think it's cool. They named all of their blends after NATO rounds. So this is the 556. Then they've also got the 7.62 and the 50 BMG.
7.62 when you absolutely just need to blow somebody up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But so they've got the Field version, which has kind of the more simple band, and then the Garrison version, which is like I don't know what exactly, like the dress blues.
It's like your dress uniform rather than your field uniform. You gotta look fancy and presentable. I'm just gonna, pardon me, I don't know whether I want to protect my electronics here or whether I want to protect my whiskey, but either way, we're going to be doing this episode one-armed, at least for a little bit, because, that's just how we roll. So, first of all, I just want to say the band is not really representative of a company that is kind of putting out their well, like you say, they're direct to consumers, but really not what I expect out of a company that's at their first IPCPR. I mean, these are sharp looking bands. They got, we held them up, but they got that nice reflective.
They're kind of hard to see on camera though, because
a little bit hard to see.
So shiny,
very shiny.
So
you can check that out at the show page at cigarfederation.com. But you tricked me up because we're talking blend before the show, and I went 0 for 3 on my guesses. So maybe drop some knowledge bombs, because this, certainly the wrapper tobacco caught me by surprise. The presentation, the performance out of the Vitola, out of the flavor profile out of the wrapper. That's what I mean to say. This is what happens when I don't sleep for a week. The flavor performance does not match up what I was expecting when you dropped the knowledge bomb of what the wrapper was.
It is actually reaching a point for me now where it's matching up with what my expectations would be. But the wrapper is Nicaraguan Corojo, the binder is undisclosed Nicaraguan, and the filler is Nicaraguan and Honduran. But I think I'm starting to get some of that, like that creamy but kind of delicate spice that you get from Nicaraguan Corojo. Not super spicy, but it's definitely got some spice there.
Yeah, when you said Nicaraguan Corojo, first of all, if you look at the cigar, I think just my experience with Nicaraguan Corojo is typically I see a lot of really dark Nicaraguan Corojo. Like I would say that Nicaraguan Corojo I'm used to is it's got to be like 2 shades darker than this, or at least a full shade darker than this. And the performance right off the start, what was I saying? I was like, well, this is clearly Ecuadorian because it's, super creamy. I didn't really get that spice until the cigar settled in. And I think that's kind of nice because you know, there's so many cigars now that are kind of front loaded with that spice. So you light it up, and you know, don't get me wrong, I love spice. I'm a spice fiend. I absolutely love spice, but especially with Nicaraguan wrapper, I was kind of anticipating a blend that would punch you right in the mouth immediately, and that's not really the performance at all. You get that really subtle creaminess, and you know, like you said, the spice is kind of coming through on the retro, but now, because we're probably what 15, 20 minutes in, and
Yeah.
the spice is starting to
Yeah, it's
play.
kind of just starting to ramp up. And I did notice we were talking about this before the show. Um, Now they don't disclose the factory, but they do say they're handmade in Esteli, obviously a Nicaraguan factory. Uh,
Makes sense.
and it does say here that they are blended by David Blanco. I wasn't sure if that was marketing knowledge or not,
Nice.
or something they were keeping a secret. But these are blended by none other than David Blanco of Blanco Cigars.
Which we also had an interview with at the show. Actually, you know what? I think that was the other guy, David. When we were doing the interview with
Mhm.
David, he said you got to go talk to the Warfighter guys, and we were like, "Hey, David, you know, no offense, but we got those guys on day one. Here we are seeing you
Yeah.
on day two. So I mean, we kind of, I don't know if that's backwards or not, but he was happy that we, you know, went and talked, and it is a struggle for us to get all the booths we want to get in the show.
Oh
I
yeah.
think we were really happy to get the Warfighter guys in day one. I'm sure their week picked up, and probably by day three would have been really tough to get into their booth.
Yeah, I think day 3 and day 4 they were probably slammed because they won the Best in Show
Hmm.
award.
So, I mean, I'm starting to get this really, really nice cocoa. It took a while to develop for me. And I think maybe it was hidden underneath the spice and the creaminess, but it's got this really nice subtle cocoa. The spice, I think you were kind of talking about it, kind of little reminiscent of the old Dom Pepin blacks,
Yeah.
where it's not that overpowering spice. It's that, you know, that nice zippy spice where it just kind of matches the strength of the creaminess. And I mean, so far so good. We're only, you know, an inch into the cigar, and I was already asking you like what the MSRP on these bad boys was, because I was like, well, this is probably a cigar I would pick up. And what were these bad boys going for?
Uh,
It's got to be
it,
like a $12 cigar, right?
it's about 850.
850.
Yeah, it's pretty reasonable, I think.
That's pretty reasonable.
I mean, you can let me. I'm on their website right now, and you can get a 5 pack of these for $45 or a bundle of 20 for 180.
I mean, that's super reasonable. I think you tend to see a lot of boutique companies, especially with their initial line, if they don't have a factory, if they're being produced through another factory, 850 is a tough price point to meet. I think most of
Hmm.
the boutique stuff I've seen has been, I want to say, north of $10. It's certainly 950. So I think, you know, I don't know if maybe they're just not making enough money on these cigars, but 850 seems like a decent deal when price points these days are well over the $10 mark, especially for a boutique company.
I would speculate that part of that is because of the direct consumer model.
Mm,
Because that way you don't have to build in keystone pricing and stuff. You don't have wholesale prices to worry about.
that's true.
So you're getting a little more meat on the bone selling direct
Cutting
to
out those
consumer.
fat cat middlemen.
Yeah.
Always get
Um,
their hand in your
and
pocket.
and I mean, I would have to imagine that they'll be about the same price at retail. Um, I just haven't seen them at retail anywhere yet.
So, I mean, we're kind of early in the show, but it's warfightertobacco.com, correct?
I believe so. Let me just
I think
double check.
I mean,
Yeah,
I was looking at their website.
warfightertobacco.com.
Warfightertobacco.com. So, I mean, they've got a lot of cigars. They've got what I would consider to be a fairly fleshed out portfolio. We've got a Connecticut that I'm kind of stoked, frankly, to smoke. I think I'm going to sit down and do a review. Hopefully, get that in before my departure date. Yeah, it's a good cigar so far. I'm kind of I mean, I've been kind of cheating and
Yeah.
kind of pairing it with some of the whiskey already. Just because, you know, it's been that kind of couple weeks that I need a little bit of whiskey here. I'm just going to undeploy
Oh,
my
good.
umbrella there, because I think at least for the time being we're good. Hopefully, it doesn't look like any of my whiskeys were diluted. That's what I was, you know, electronics second, whiskey first, so everything seems to be all right. And I think maybe what we should do is just take a quick break and hear from our sponsor, then we'll come back and talk about our pairings. What do you think?
Sure.
All right, giddy up. brought to you by Gurkha Cigars. Gurkha Cigars, makers of the world's finest cigars. Try the 93 rated Heritage featuring Rosado, Ecuadorian Habano wrapper, Nicaraguan binder, and Dominican, Pennsylvanian, and Nicaraguan fillers. Blended by Gurkha's blending team at American Caribbean Cigars, it is hand-rolled Nicaraguan, available in 35-count boxes. Talk to your local B&M about the Heritage today, or talk to them about other fine Gurkha cigars. Whatever your taste preference is, Gurkha has a cigar that's right for you. You're tuned into Sharing Our Pairings, episode 120, Warfighter Tobacco. This is the Goodbye Surgeon tour, because I am departing. More about that later in the show. Right now, we just want to focus on these delicious cigars from Warfighter Tobacco. And Trippy, you said they just can't keep engaged enough. Apparently, they are watching the show, which thanks very much for tuning into our show, and had some little nuggets, some tidbits.
Yeah,
some
Scott
bits.
Jansen from Warfighter. He's who we interviewed during the first part of our interview at IPCPR this year. He has a couple little nuggets of knowledge. The award they won was Best New Exhibitor.
Nice.
So the best company that hasn't had a booth before. He says the 5.56 pairs very well with terrorists. Meaning of course the rounds, not the cigars.
That's right. You got to introduce some bad guys to 5.56s, and that's what we like to call on Sharing Our Pairings a party.
He says they are made in the Placencia factory, and they will go to retail in October of this year. So you got just about a month before you're going to start seeing these popping up at retail. So
I mean, we almost timed this show like we knew what we were doing, really.
Yeah, even though we didn't, it's almost like we did. Yeah.
No, there's no conspiracy. It's purely by accident. So the I don't know about the 5.56 because I've only fired off in my life a couple hundred rounds of 5.56, and certainly not on deployment because Canadians, we're too busy making friends, and I'm not good enough to be in the military in the Canadias. So instead, I'm going to pair this delicious Warfighter Tobacco with some whiskey, and it looks. Again, you think we did this on purpose. We both had the same idea. Got to go thank Glenrothes. I love Glenrothes. I love it. I love it. I love it. And this is a bottle that I featured, I think, once or twice on the show. I'll hold that up for our audience.
I think I actually had a dram of that you gave me a couple weeks ago. I
think you did. So this was a dram that, kind of bury the lead. It's the Glenrothes 1975. This is, in fact, a 30-year-old Glenrothes. And this was a bottle that I bought some time ago to celebrate moving industries. I'd moved from an industry, a telecommunications industry, into oil and gas. And to celebrate that, I bought the Glenrothes 1975. So this bottle's a couple years old now, but I use sort of the wine nitrogen spray to keep the whiskey fresh, as it were, keep it from aging with the oxygen. Mm-hmm. But it's delicious. I'll not steal your thunder on the Glenrothes. I'll maybe touch on some of the key points of the distillery after you're done. But the 1975, so it was distilled in 1975, bottled in 2006 in March. 3,708 bottles produced, which is actually a lot for a 30-year-old whiskey. I kind of would have expected the numbers to be in the 300-400 range. So they obviously had a few casks of this, or I don't know, whatever. Happily bottled at 43% ABV, thank goodness. I'll hold that up. I mean, the color here isn't really going to tell you much on an older whiskey. It's kind of a dull gold, almost approaching maybe a dull bronze. Noses beautifully. It's got orange zest, vanilla, toffee notes. I mean, just a little bit of chocolate underneath that. It's a delightful dram. So what do you got? What do you got queued up in number one slot tonight?
I hadn't really noticed the citrus. There's definitely some lemon and orange zest in the nose there. Mm-hmm. So the Glenrothes that I'm drinking came out of this little bottle because I don't have an entire bottle of it. But it is the 1988. It was distilled in 1988 and barreled in a mixture of Spanish and American oak barrels.
Nice.
Then bottled in 2011, which makes 23 years old. Also clocking in at 43 ABV. And I don't have a lot of information about the Glenrothes distillery, but I know that they were founded in 1878 And as I think I talked about last time I talked about them, they have a very storied history of uh, they've learned some lessons in how you should handle overproof whiskey because they've had a couple buildings burned down, they've had a few explosions there. Um, they've just not had a great couple of centuries as far as whiskey goes.
It's true, and this is a Speyside distillery. In fact, most of the whiskeys I'm pairing tonight are from the Spey region. They use the Ladies Well as their water source. They're a pretty big producer, just under 5.6 million liters of spirit. That's 1.48 Freedom gallons, 1.48 million Freedom gallons for all the Freedom listeners out there. And they're not really known for age statement whiskey. It's kind of funny because we're both drinking what we really considered to be sort of the premier age statement releases that they had. We were talking offline.
Yeah.
The 1988. That was kind of one of the first bottles I bought of Glenrothes of sort of their aged range because, first of all, it's exceptional. Second of all, if you see it on the shelf, you got to grab it because, I mean, it's just a phenomenal release. The 1991 was also really, really good, but the 88 was just exceptional. Of course, the 1975 is amazing, but that's not really what they're known for. They do what they call vintage releases, which is essentially a vintage release of that year of whiskey. So it's a no-age statement typically. Then when you buy a bottle of Glenrothes, it's got a mixture of different age statements of whiskey, and as such, it doesn't carry an age statement. I mean, Glenrothes for me is a whiskey drinker's whiskey. It's approachable, it's subtle, but don't let subtlety confuse you with a lack of depth of flavor because it's one of those whiskeys that you do have to reach a little bit for. You have to really put some effort into paying attention to the flavor profile because it's so nuanced, it's so subtle. This 75 is kind of one of those ones where you got to take a few sips and come back to it 5 or 10 minutes later to really let your palate pick up the nuances because you don't want to slam a 30-year-old whiskey.
No.
Mm.
Yeah, it's a very complex whiskey. It's kind of hard to pick out the flavors. There's some
Yeah.
I can't pick out what it is. It's almost like, again, I always come back, like with Scotch, I always come back to the descriptions that sound just awful, which is kind of like wood varnish. It reminds me a little of like wood varnish, but again, as I always say, in a good way. Not taking a sip out of wood varnish, but just kind of a little bit of that essence. If you've ever like smelled wood varnish and there's that little part of it that smells good, it's that part.
For me, again, and I think you hit it. It's got kind of a. Both of these have, I think, definitely some orange and some lemon. Very subtle because I think those are two citrusy flavors that can be very overpowering. But it's just kind of there. It's just that really core citrus component without being sharp, without being bitter. What I find really interesting is that when I take a sip of this Glenrothes 1975 and then take a retrohale off the 556 Warfighter Garrison, I get a lot of that cocoa that when I wasn't taking a sip of the whiskey, the cocoa was maybe buried a little bit. Like I kind of had to reach for the flavors. But when I take a sip of the whiskey, kind of let my palate clear for a second and then take a retrohale of Garrison, I mean, it's just a wonderful dark chocolate, cocoa chocolate. And the spices really pushed aside, which I find surprising. I think maybe the sweetness in this Glenrothes is kind of pushing that sweetness aside, which I dig because chocolate. Hey man, chocolate in a cigar, absolutely.
Yeah, and I get a little bit of like almost a berry flavor, like maybe cherry or not
Interesting.
cherry, maybe kind of like maybe more like raspberry on the retrohale. Just kind of a little bit of that sweetness from like raspberry preserves.
I could see that. I do get and again, I think we're talking. Interestingly enough, even though, like I said, Nicaraguan Corojo, very nuanced. I get a little bit of like a toasted wood quality, like a toasted oak quality at the end of the retrohale. It's quite subtle.
Definitely.
It doesn't have a drying mouthfeel, which I do find some cigars that have a woody component tend to bring a drying mouthfeel, which I'm not a big fan of. But instead, this is just that nice toasted quality, and then it kind of disappears, and you're left with really that sweetness from the tobacco. Yeah, man, this is props to them. This is a good cigar.
Yeah, this is a solid cigar.
I kind of don't want to move on from my Glenrothes 1975.
Me neither, but I also don't want to finish drinking it.
Come back to this in a little bit. I mean, this is a great pairing. This is, I think I aimed well without really knowing the specs and the flavor performance of the cigar. You know, a broken clock is right twice a day, and I managed to pull one out of the fire here. This is a great pairing. Sadly, it is time to move on. And I'm kind of going in a random direction here. I'm going with an independent bottler, and I had to crack this bottle because, you know, I have bottles that I just don't open because I don't know what my problem is. So this is from one of the oldest independent bottlers. In fact, not one of the oldest independent bottlers in Scotland. This is the Cadenhead small batch. This is bought from my local bottle place that I love and adore, Kensington Wine Market, and this is a 24-year-old. Now, this is kind of one of those great independent bottlers. They bottle at cask strength. They do not accept chill filtration whiskeys. They do not accept colored whiskeys. It's got to be naturally non-chill filtered and not colored. So it's just whatever's in the cask, out of the cask into the bottle. It's not brought down to any amount. It's whatever it is in the cask. This one happens to be 54.4%, so it's a little bit of a heater compared to the 1975. Mm-hmm. It's going to be a little bit more intense. So Cadenhead actually goes back to 1842 as an independent bottler. And I've heard a few stories when I was at a whiskey tasting, and I'll tell those after. But they're currently owned by J&A Mitchell and Company, who are also the owners of Springbank Distillery. Cadenhead changed hands a couple times. Interestingly enough, J&A Mitchell is actually I'll get into that later. But essentially, like I said, Cadenhead, their absolute specialty is just, you know, absolute amazing single cask whiskeys, non-chill filtered. This one was distilled in 1991, bottled in 2016. Only 486 bottles produced. Now, again, That's probably as a result of the fact that it's being bottled at cask strength. And if you look at the color, it's really washed out. It's really got a really light straw color. But you nose that bad boy, and you know you're dealing with a big whiskey here. So this comes from the Tamdhu distillery originally. Tamdhu was founded in 1986. Again, it's a Speyside distillery. We're kind of keeping it within the Speyer region. They produce a reasonable amount, 4.5 million science liters of spirit, which is just under 1.2 million freedom gallons. That's a lot of gallons. I'm going to take some sippies and let you have a word about your second pairing of the night.
So my second pairing is all three of my pairings are from John this week. So my second one is Glengoyne, yeah. Glengoyne, cask strength. They're interesting because they were founded in 1833, which is pretty old, but not
pretty old.
I mean, not one of the oldest. And they are in Dumgoyne, north of Glasgow. And the really unique thing about them is that they distill all their whiskey in the Highlands, but they're right on the edge. They're right on the border of the Highlands and the Lowlands. So their distillery is actually in the Highlands. Their warehouse where they age all the whiskey is actually in the Lowlands. And they use absolutely no peat in anything that they make. This is their cask strength offering, which they describe as rich, peppery, and fruity. And they call it Scotland's slowest distillation. I'm not sure exactly what that means. I'm assuming it's the type of still that they use is a little slower than most.
Yeah, I wonder if it's like maybe what it is a really tall still with a really long neck.
Yeah.
And that gets you different cuts of the whiskey as a result.
Oh, that would make sense. And it's matured in sherry casks that are made from European and American oak.
I love sherry cask
and
whiskey.
Another really interesting thing is they have pairing suggestions for food on their site. And with this, they suggest pairing banana loaf, curry, or haggis.
I do like a good haggis pairing. That speaks to me.
And you can see it's kind of exactly the same color as my last pairing.
Yeah.
And
that deep gold, deep amber.
Yeah, and this is a pretty hot 58.7% ABV. Nice.
Well, we'll see how the Warfighter 556 Garrison stands up, but first we're going to take a break from one of our sponsors. This show is sponsored by Cigar Oasis. Don't spend all your time worrying about your cigar wrappers cracking, splitting, or falling apart from humidity fluctuation issues. Set it and forget it by choosing Cigar Oasis, a professional solution which provides equal distribution of humidity with precise electronic controls. Monitor your cigars through the internet using the Smart Humidor Wi-Fi attachment. Why don't you spend all your time enjoying your cigars and relaxing, and let Cigar Oasis protect your cigars? Cigar Oasis has solutions for any humidor. Make sure you set it and forget it today. You're tuned into Sharing Our Pairings episode 120. I'm your host, John the Cigar Surgeon, joined as always by my co-host, Trippy Trent. We are broadcast live around the world and picked up on the Armed Forces Radio Network. Thanks to all our podcast listeners out there. We know you guys are stationed all over the world, maybe even on active duty. And of course, we are pairing a Warfighter Tobacco company, which is founded by none other than some... what do I mean to say, Trippy? Man, it's been a long couple of weeks.
Founded by 6 veterans from different branches of the military.
Active military veterans. And this is a fantastic cigar. This is the 556, of course, named after the 556 millimeter round, which, you know, gets the job done when you need to get the job done.
Oh, it sure does.
And this is the Garrison, and so far so good. We've done a pairing with Glenrothes. Now we've moved on to a second whiskey, and I really can't wrap my head around this Tamdhu. It's big, man. This is anytime you get into that cask strength whiskey, I mean, it just takes your brain a while to adjust. This is a big whiskey. The cigar's still going well, but I don't know if my brain's going well or not. It's kind of got like a little bit of chlorophyll, like, you know, that kind of green plant note to it, which is interesting. Underneath that, it's got a ton of citrus and vanilla. But I think the nose really kind of belies the flavor strength, because when I take a sip of this, my palate is just all over the place. I don't know what to make of it.
So the Glengoyne, it's real hot, and it definitely, like the description said, it's got a lot of like kind of peppery spice to it. But then it's got like a sort of creamy, fruity, and a little bit of like caramel, like, I don't know. I want to call it like caramel dipped fruit kind of flavor is kind of the core. But like you said, cask strength, it takes your palate a little bit to adjust.
Now I am finding that the 556 Garrison is actually standing up to the whiskey. I was a little worried going this hot, especially blind, because I don't know what the profile of the cigar is, that maybe it was going to run the cigar over, but I'm finding that's not the case. If anything, I think it's kind of pushing the cigar a little bit. Some of that toasted quality I was talking about, that I was kind of getting hints of, I think that's bringing a little bit more out of that. Unfortunately, I'm losing a little bit of the chocolate, because I'm getting, I think we're having a similar tasting experience here. Mine is quite spicy. Like, it's got that, and spice is the wrong word. Pepper is the word I'm looking for. It's got a little bit of that pepper quality. It doesn't finish peppery. It finishes sweet. So I do get more of the pepper out of the Garrison than I do get out of when I was with the Glenrothes. I think because the sweetness of this Tamdhu, this Cadenhead, is a little bit dialed down. It allows some of those spices from the cigar to come forward a little bit. I got to take a couple more sips, and like, again, I'm really struggling to get my palate adjusted, because this is just, it's a monster whiskey. Even at 54, it's big. Yeah,
and mine is kind of, it's similar but kind of the opposite. Similar but different.
Similar but different.
It's definitely got that peppery kick, but then it's got a lot of sweetness. And I feel like the sweetness is really bringing out the woodier notes in the cigar, and kind of hiding the spice and the sweetness a little. But I do get a lot of creaminess still out of the cigar.
So interestingly enough, I think we are having the second half of our whiskeys is very different, because mine is more along the briny salty. I'm starting now, as my palate adjusts, to get a lot more briny salty, and I don't know if you just kind of put it into my brain, inceptioned me there, but I am now getting, I don't think I'd call it raspberry, I'd call it like fresh strawberry.
I was thinking strawberry, but then I was thinking that can't be what I'm tasting.
Hmm.
because I don't think I've ever tasted strawberry in a cigar, but I do feel like there's a little bit in there.
I mean, I don't know that I've ever tasted strawberry in a cigar before either, and I'm sure that people on the internets are going to make fun of me for it. But that sweetness, that fruity sweetness that is really specific to, because I think for me, raspberries have a little bit of tartness to it, and
Yeah.
strawberries are devoid of the tartness. It's like I'm taking a puff and then someone waves a strawberry under my nose. So it's fleeting. It's
It
only
really
there
is.
for a couple seconds. Um, but it's interesting. Again, I think that saltiness brings out the pepper on the cigar, which I really enjoy. The chocolate, sadly, is being pushed aside, and I really, really like that part of the cigar. But now I'm getting that strawberry, which I absolutely wasn't getting in my first pairing. So a very different experience than the first whiskey pairing of the night.
Yeah, I think that this one, actually, now that you mention it, is really supercharging that kind of strawberry kind of flavor. And it reminds me of less of like a fresh strawberry and more of like strawberries that you put in a pie that are,
Mm,
stewed and
a little
sweetened.
stewed. Yeah. No, I think I'm right there with you. And I am getting a little bit more of a lingering woodiness now, where that wood was kind of, again, I think the sweetness from the Glenrothes is really running that woodiness over. That woodiness is kind of lingering a little bit, and not again in a bad drawing way. It kind of finishes with like a toasted oak, and you get a little bit of that oaky flavor. It sits there for about 15 seconds and then kind of drops right off. Um, I love it when you go from a whiskey pairing that is just bringing totally different notes out of a cigar, and then you try a different whiskey and it's like a 180-degree turn,
Yeah.
completely different pairing experience, and you bring different notes out of the cigar that you weren't necessarily getting out of the first pairing.
Yeah, and that's really kind of the case for trying pairings back to back like this,
Mm.
because it changes not only does the cigar change as you smoke it, but your perception of it changes because of the pairing.
Mm.
And that's what makes a good pairing.
And like I said, I think what's nice is that I was worried this cask strength was going to blow the cigar out. Cask strength is tough to predict, but in this case,
Mhm.
so far so good. The 5.56 getting that job done, as Scott was saying. How are we doing for comments, questions, feedback, emojis, or just general S talking on the internet?
Michael Caine, I'm assuming he's not the actor, but if he is, I love your work, Michael.
Absolutely.
He says he got the sampler from Warfighter,
Nice.
and he says they pair well with everything he's drank. He drinks more old Scotch and Irish whiskey, but Jefferson Aged at Sea was the best one that he's paired with any of the Warfighters, and he says the 50 cal is his favorite of the Warfighters.
That's legit. When you absolutely just need to blow something up, you drop the 50 cal and just take everything out and everything behind it.
Anti-material.
Mm-hmm. They gone. This is a good cigar, man. I'm really digging this. I mean, this. I'm going to take one more sip. I know we've kind of had a couple sips. I'm going to take one more sip here before we get into our last pairing, because this is such a departure from the first pairing of the night. I just kind of want to get all I can get out, and we're going to come back and revisit these pairings and give them a rating. But want to stretch it out a little bit here.
Yeah.
So it's so big. I mean, I've talked at length about cask strength whiskeys and why I love cask strength whiskeys. And you don't have to drink your whiskey at cask strength. I know there's been a lot of discussion about watering, like putting water in your whiskey or putting cubes in your whiskey. You drink your whiskey any way you like. I like my whiskey straight. I like my whiskey with no water, no ice. Although, truth be told, it's a little chilly out. As you can see, that is not cigar smoke coming out of my nose and mouth.
Yeah, I noticed that.
It's a little on the chilly side, but for surgeon smoking, it's really not that bad because it's not below freezing just yet. Yeah, man, it's I could see this going well with a porter. I could see this going really well with a bourbon. I could see this going really well. I mean, I think this is probably one of those cigars that's going to have a pretty wide appeal.
As far as pairing goes, I feel like this blend is really versatile.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Mm. Very good. Very, very good. Going to move on to the last pairing of the night. Now, what's weird is I love grabbing a whiskey off my shelf that I've had a lot and going, okay, well, I'll just go back to my show notes because I was working today quite late, and I'll just kind of cheat and grab my show notes from a previous show, and I couldn't find it. which is so weird. And I was like, well, I must have featured this distillery on a show. You know, we've had 120 shows, 119 shows. I must have featured this on the show before, but I have not. And this is an oldie, literally, but a goodie. This is the Aberfeldy. And Aberfeldy is not a distillery that I think gets a lot of love, maybe flies under the radar. Of course, because it is the farewell tour, I'm going very, very big tonight. A little bit lower in the ABV, but this is a 21-year-old whiskey. Go big or go home. A little bit about Aberfeldy. Again, an old distillery established in 1898. I think they were actually built in 1896. Didn't officially start distilling until 1896. Located in Perthshire, which is a North Midland distillery. So they're just a little bit south of the Speyside region. Owned and founded by John Dewar and Sons. And there was some ownership changes. There was some history there. In 1917, they had to close. A little something about World War One. They decided that whiskey grain was maybe a little bit more beneficial to give to troops, not so much for the whiskey distillation. Totally understandable. Resumed production in 1919, and they changed hands and now are back with John Dewar and Sons, which is now a division, a subdivision, if you will, of Bacardi. Their water source is the Patil Burn, which I don't know at all, but you know, for those who are whiskey hounds out there that like to know with the water source, there you go. They produce, we're kind of going in declining order tonight. It's a modest amount of 3.5 million science liters, which is 924,000 freedom gallons. Still reasonable amount. It's not a very small distillery. This clocks in at 40% ABV. For those who care, it's bottle number A33954 or Alpha 33954, and they were aged entirely in ex-bourbon oak casks. I'm going to take some noses, some sippies, and you can talk about your third and final pairing of the night, Trippy.
So my final pairing, again, I don't have a bottle for this. And a very interesting thing is all three spirits are the exact same color. This one is not a Scotch. This is Ron Cubay 10-year. So this is Ron Cubay is distilled by the same company that distills Havana Club. And it was originally, correct me if I'm wrong about anything here, it was originally made as a non-export product. So the only place you could really get it was in Cuba. And
which is where I got my bottle.
About 8 years ago, I think, they started exporting it. But of course, this came directly from Cuba. Well, directly from John by way of Cuba.
By way of Cuba.
And they kind of describe it as the best that they have to offer as far as Ron Cubay goes. It's the oldest expression they make, and it clocks in at 40% ABV. I don't know if there's anything I'm missing there about it, but that's most of the details that I could find.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd probably add is that, as I understand it, it's a vatting of industrial rum and agricultural rum.
Okay.
So you kind of get a little bit of both worlds. When I go down to Cuba, I like, I've got some shops that I visit, some people I know there very well, and I got introduced to this by a good friend of mine down in Cuba, and she said that if you really want something that you really haven't tried before, that's unique, it's unique and speaks to sort of the core of rum production in Cuba and isn't a mass-produced type product, go for the Ron Cubay. And I had, I don't know, half a bottle. So by the time I had half a bottle, I was like, okay, yeah, this is pretty good. And of course, buying it down in Cuba, dirt cheap as far as rum goes.
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought it was a really interesting rum, and I like to pick up spirits in general that are not like anything else I've tasted, and not like anything else in my collection.
Yeah, and it's got that classic Cuban rum character. The thing that I find with Cuban rum that I don't usually find with any other South American rum is the bitterness. Mm-hmm. Cuba really likes to balance their rum with a little bitterness, and it seems like most rums out there are pretty sweet, especially like the more mass market kind of stuff. And this is maybe a little bit more bitter than like the Havana Club 7 that I've got. But still, the bitterness is kind of the unique thing to me as far as Cuban rum goes.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. I think that obviously there's a lot of care that goes into the design of the flavor profile they're looking for, and I
Hmm.
think you're right. I think other than Florida Canya, and again, Florida Canya to me kind of stands out as a unique rum product. There are a lot of rums that are very, very sweet and like almost cloyingly sweet, and
Yeah.
it's got its place. I like a rum like that, but when I'm going for a higher end rum, I want a more balanced experience. I don't just want one note of flavor. I want some complexity. I want some balance. And really, for the most part, I'm drinking rum and smoking cigars. So for me, it's got to be a good pairing. It can't just be a rum on its own. And I'm certainly not taking a rum Cubay 10 and mixing it into a drink as a filler. So
Yeah, I would not mix this. To me, this is a step below the selection de maestros, but a couple steps above like the Havana Club 7.
yeah, that makes sense. So we do have a spot for our last sponsor, but we're not going to play the video because it is a little bit outdated. So our last sponsor of the night is Drew Estate. They good. Mm. If you aren't a member of the Drew Diplomat app, go to the iTunes or Play Store. If you're a Google phone user, Android user, download the app. They've got a lot of stuff going on. They've got artwork. They've got giveaways constantly going. It's kind of a social media platform, so you can share your what you're smoking. There's a lot of different product on there. It doesn't just contain the Drew Estate product, but also Hoya, Debonair. So there's a lot of different cigars. You can interact, comment on other people's
Hmm.
posts. A little bit like the Untapped app, but just for Drew Estate. Download that. You'll have a good time. Unfortunately, I'm in Canada. We don't have as much freedom as the United States. So as a result, I can't install the app. Boo, Canadian government. Boo. And that's my little Drew Estate plug for the night.
Well, and I've got another like a piggyback off of that plug. We're kind of entering a gauntlet of Drew Estate cigar chats for the next couple weeks.
That's true. That's a good
So
segue.
this week we have Jeff Boyshowitz tomorrow. He owns Corona Cigar Company, and he's the guy behind FSG. He's the one who said, I need to figure out how to grow tobacco in Florida and turn it into cigars. And of course, Drew Estate helped him out with that.
Jeff
Um,
basically hates money, really, is what it is.
yeah, I mean, growing tobacco in the US is insanely expensive. And growing experimental tobacco in a place where tobacco hasn't been grown in 100 years seems even crazier.
But we'll talk about that more in detail tomorrow night on Cigar Chat, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard. Get your questions in, get your comments in.
And
That's going to be
we are
that's
going
going
to
to be
be
a good show.
giving away some. I haven't seen exactly what the selections are, but we're going to be giving away some Subculture Studios stuff. That
What?
I expect, some stuff with some FSG logos on it.
Get your weasel on.
So get your questions in. If you ask
Got
a
to get your questions
question,
in.
you have a chance to win.
Trippy's going to be picking the winners, so Trippy doesn't screw around. You got to
Yep.
get some good questions in. None of them lay down questions about, oh Jeff, what's the best cigar you've ever smoked? What would you pair the FSG? We want some hard hitting questions.
Yeah.
We don't mess around here on Cigar Chat and Cigar Federation. So getting back to our last pairing of the night, Aberfeldy 21. I think I might have misplaced my lineup here. This Aberfeldy 21, I think maybe would have been better slotted into the second slot of the night. It's a little bit more complex, or maybe intense is the word I'm looking for, than the Glenrothes 1975. But it's a tough follow up to a cask strength whiskey. That was a rookie whiskey move by Surgeon tonight.
Yeah, I made the exact same mistake. So I tried to go in order of sweetness,
Mm-hmm.
um, which usually treats me pretty well. But when you're going from 43 to 58 and then back down all the way down to 40, um, I honestly could not taste the first couple sips of this Ron Cubay.
Mm-hmm.
Now my palate's back. I'm able to taste it. But yeah, that was a rookie mistake.
You'd think I wouldn't have been drinking whiskey for 8 years. So talking about this Aberfeldy 21, it's right in line with what I would expect out of an ex-bourbon cask whiskey. It's got some nice stone fruit there that's quite subtle. There's no saltiness to speak of. It's really just some subdued and complex sweetness. I I think I'd be getting a lot more out of this whiskey if it was paired second of the night instead of third of the night. So I think some of the nuances are a little bit being lost on me. But we're back into the category, the classification of where I was with the first pairing of the night, where just kind of reinforces to me that the whiskey is bringing flavors out of this cigar that the other whiskey was not. And I'm back to getting that really nice cocoa with a little bit of a pepper finish. The woodiness that I was getting out of the cigar, can't taste it at all now. So it's really just chocolate and woodiness, and those are great flavors. I'm happy that if that was all that this cigar offered, I'd be having a good time. And obviously, we've been talking about other flavors that have been coming out of the cigar as we get to. I think I'm pretty much at the halfway point here. How's your pairing experience going?
I think this rum goes really well with the cigar. It really changes the profile of the cigar. There's almost no sweetness now, but there's a lot of creaminess, a lot of like powdered cocoa, and then it kind of amps up the spice. What little spice is left at this point, it kind of amps it up a little bit, and I'm getting kind of that black pepper, white pepper, red pepper flavor.
I think Michael hit the nail on the head when he was talking about Irish whiskey, because I think Irish whiskey would be a fantastic pairing with a cigar. Again, I'm really kind of blown away. Nicaraguan Corojo, this is not what I've typically experienced out of a cigar blended with a Nicaraguan Corojo wrapper. It's subtle, it's nuanced, it's complex, it's not in your face. I would really classify this as probably medium strength, medium plus body, just a wide range of flavors. And obviously because of the strength level, I think opens it up to a wide variety of pairings, both alcoholic and non-alcoholic.
Yeah, and a really interesting thing about this cigar is that even though it's kind of in the more medium profile, it's still got enough flavor and enough strength to stand up to a cask strength whiskey.
Yeah, good point.
Which is really surprising.
It is, because I mean that's always the trick, especially when you talk about a more full flavored beverage experience, whether it's a beer, whether it's a what do I mean to say? Whether it's a wow, my brain's... No, I was thinking a cocktail. There's the word I'm looking for.
Ah, okay.
Boy, I could use 12 hours of sleep. You know, it's going to stand up to, you know, root beer would be really nice. A Dr. Pepper would be really nice. Even a really, you know, not in your face iced tea might be a really interesting pairing with a cigar. So I think it's going to have a pretty broad appeal to people who want to pair with a variety of different beverages, both alcoholic and non-alcoholic. And you're going to get a different pairing experience with the different beverages. I think a Dr. Pepper would probably bring out a lot more cocoa. And obviously because Dr. Pepper tends to be a little bit spicy, run over the spice. Good. I think every single pairing I've had tonight has been very good. Not good, but very good, with some of them being excellent. So maybe what we can do, Trippy, is just kind of go back over our pairings of the night and recap. I started out the night with the Glenrothes 1975. I mean, how can you go wrong with a 30-year-old whiskey? And see, I love going back to the whiskey, you know, after it's sat and just, it tastes or smells like Christmas candy in it. You know that when you go to a jar or a bowl of Christmas candy and it's got that crazy amount of sweetness to it. I'm getting a ton of that sweetness off the nose now. So layered, so complex. And I think that's probably my favorite pairing of the night. Not just because the whiskey was fantastic, but I think for me, it kind of showcased what the cigar has to offer with the powdered cocoa, with the different levels of spice, with a little bit of that toasted oak. Probably my pairing of the night. I want to say it's a 93-94 pairing for me. This is something I would go back to time and time again. How was your first pairing?
Yeah, I would give the Glenrothes exactly like 93, 94. It's really, just the flavors mesh so well with the cigar. And I notice now that I'm going back to it, a lot of oakiness. I'm really getting some of that oak from the barrel aging that I wasn't really tasting before. Yeah.
Second pairing of the night for me, we both went cask strength. I went with an independent bottler, Cadenhead from Tamdhu. It's the Tamdhu 24 monster, just a monster whiskey. Big in my face. I still liked it, even though it was a substantial departure from my first and third whiskeys of the night. I would still rate this a 90-91. I think I preferred the first and third whiskeys because I like that powdered cocoa, but it isn't to say it's a bad pairing. It just took the cigar in a different way than I was expecting, but still a 90-91, something I would absolutely go back to again.
I would give the Glengoyne 88-89. It's not quite as, it doesn't pair quite as well as yours, but it's also a little bit hotter. I think
it's hot.
I think the heat in this, just having a cask strength is a little much for this cigar, even though the cigar really does stand up to it.
And the last pairing of the night, which was a pairing misstep by me, Aberfeldy 21, which outstanding whiskey, but a little too subtle after going to a cask strength whiskey. For me, this is more of an 88-89. Again, kind of run over by the fact that I've got a 30-year-old whiskey and a cask strength whiskey. It kind of ends up being the ugly Betty of the night, even though it's a fantastic 21-year-old whiskey on its own rights. I think if we had paired, or I had paired this Aberfeldy with a different showcase, it might end up in the low 90s. As it is with the current lineup, this is kind of an 88-89, still bringing out some of that powdered cocoa, a little bit of that toasted oak quality out of the cigar. Not quite as good as Glenrothes 1975 for me, but still very enjoyable.
And for me, the Ron Cubay rather, it's just a whiskey that, or a rum rather, that goes really well with a cigar. I feel like that kind of grassy bitterness of a Cuban rum just complements a cigar, even though it's still got that sweetness that most rums have. It's kind of offset by the bitterness, and it really brings out some of the creamier, oakier, woodier flavors of the cigar. I would give that one a 92.
All in all, a pretty good pairing night, if you ask me.
Yeah, not bad.
Like you said, we got to make sure our audience tunes in tomorrow night to Cigar Chat at our regular time of 8 p.m. Eastern Standard. We've got Jeff Borshowitz, owner of Corona Cigar Company. If you've been to Florida, you must have been to Corona. I know I've been there a bunch of times.
Oh, yeah.
I know a lot of people go to Corona. Great number of locations, all excellent cigar offerings and excellent beverage offerings. If you like bourbon, if you like spirit, it's a great place to hang out.
And the Orlando shop is like the Costco of cigar shops. It's massive.
Stupid. It's stupid, and all the delicious things that you come to expect out of a B&M, they're all there. Jeff will be on tomorrow night. Make sure to get your questions in. As Trippy was saying earlier, we've got some giveaways, so get your weasel on. We're not going to accept substandard questions, so take some time, think about your questions. We'll try to get all of them tomorrow night. I suspect that tomorrow night's show is probably going to run a little bit longer because we've got a lot to talk about.
Oh, yeah.
But as we say on Sharing Our Pairings, first of all, thanks to all our Armed Forces Radio Network listeners, wherever you're stationed in the world. Thanks so much for protecting our freedoms. Hope you guys have a great long weekend as we kind of I was going to say as we head up to Thanksgiving, but of course it's only Canadian Thanksgiving. It's not American Thanksgiving. I don't know what I'm thinking there. It's just in a couple weeks here. But hope you all have a great weekend. Stay safe. Have a chance to have some rack time, some downtime. Enjoy a good cigar. Stick around to all our live listeners. We're going to do a little bit of a After Dark segment here. Talk a little bit about my farewell tour. But as we say on Sharing Our Pairings, we do want you to drink better. Move that flag out of the way. But we do want you to drink less. Such a weird weather environment here. It is fall. It is chilly. It's not cold. It's just chilly. I don't have my jacket on because I'm not a baby, but it's so funny that it's like in a low 40 degrees freedom here, and then next week it's going to be, well, really in a couple days as I depart to do another store opening, it's going to be back up into the 70s, which 70s in the fall. I'm totally down with that.
Yeah, I mean, you could smoke a Churchill in that kind of weather. It's nice.
Absolutely.
It's really interesting to me how I mean, I'm in the Pacific Northwest, and our weather mirrors your weather, but 10 degrees warmer.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's really what it is we're in a weird weather bowl, if you will, where we get the Pacific Northwest weather, which is what we're getting next week, where it's just, all of a sudden it's warm. We get a westerly flow, which is a little bit cooler, a little bit. That's where some of this rain is coming from. And then, of course, which we hate, we get that Arctic flow that comes down, which is where we go from 75 degrees down to like -10 in a 24-hour period. And that's -10 freedom, for those paying attention
Oh,
out there. Which I've done a few beer Slurpee shows where we've had some cold weather, and it's been
hmm
unpleasant. Not really the weather you want to be pairing beer in. That's probably where you want to go your hard liquors, your spirits, so they don't freeze on the show.
you want to
But it
go
is my
cask strength and put
want
on
to go
that liquor
cask strength.
blanket.
That's right. But it is my farewell tour. I'm saying farewell, but I'm not leaving, if that makes any sense. So, kind of stepping away from my duties at Cigar Federation. I think I've been with Cigar Federation for like, God, I want to say
4
it's got to be.
years?
I think it's actually 5 years. I think
It
I might
might
be
be.
coming up on 5 years. Think
But,
about that for a second.
but an important thing for the listeners is that you're not completely leaving high and dry.
Correct.
You'll be back for some pairing shows. You'll
Redheads,
be
man.
around.
Doing some guest spots.
Yeah, exactly. But you're no longer going to be the regular co-host. For the moment, I don't really have a regular co-host. But I'll have some guest hosts coming up.
We'll do some trialing, some interviews, some trial by fires.
Yeah.
Throw people under the bus as we do on Cigar Federation. I'll still be hanging out the Cigar Federation chat, but really what it is especially as I'm working 70-hour work weeks. For those who maybe have not paid attention to previous episodes of Cigar Chat and sharing our pairings, I love the industry so much that I got into the industry, and I'm the general manager for a franchise company that does tobacco stores, tobacco retailers here in Canada.
A fairly large franchise.
It's reasonably large. We're in process of opening our 17th and 18th store, and for those who've never opened a cigar shop, tobacco store in the past, it's a lot of work, and unfortunately with that, managing 18 locations is a lot of work, and simply can't give the quality focus to Cigar Federation that I've done in the past. So, unfortunately, one gig pays me, one gig does not pay me, and ultimately, the banks are pretty insistent upon getting their money every month for my mortgage.
I know, those jerks.
Yeah, and they're like, where's the monies? Have you delivered the monies? When can we expect the monies? And it's like, boy, I feel like this relationship is really just based on money, and it's not really a friendship. And the bank's like, yeah, that's pretty much entirely our relationship, John, is that we want our money and just give us our money on time. So they're pretty insistent upon that.
Yeah, that tends to be like the focus of banks. They tend to be pretty focused on money, unfortunately.
Kind of rude that way. So I don't know what else we have to talk about in the After Dark segment. I mean, I didn't watch the Chocolito fight. I just kind of saw the highlights. I haven't, as I've been working 70-hour work weeks, I am not caught up. It's kind of sad, but I'm not caught up on Cigar Chat. So I've got a couple back episodes to catch up to. So I didn't tune into the Phil Zangi episode.
And so does that mean you also didn't watch the Triple G Canelo fight?
I did not. No, I think I saw
God,
I think I saw some highlights.
It was all highlights. The entire fight was highlights. It was
Wow.
36 minutes of highlights.
Wow.
Or I guess, is it 48 minutes of highlights? No, it's 36.
I don't know. That sounds like high level math. And after doing a store for an entire week, my brain is not quite rested enough to do any kind of math. So got no idea.
I got the math right here. It was 36 minutes of highlights.
36 minutes. So I'm sure I'm going to catch the Cool's Notes version of that on the internet and see what was what. But if you haven't checked out the back episode of last week's Cigar Chat on our podcast, Podbean, iTunes, all the other podcast catchers in the world, you definitely want to check that out. And like Trippy said, we'll be back tomorrow night with Cigar Chat with Jeff Borshowitz. That'll be a good show for sure.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to talking to Jeff.
Yeah, it's always a good time. Jeff's an interesting character. He's got a lot to talk about. I mean, we could talk for an hour just on Corona Cigar Company, let alone Florida Sun-Grown and the insanity of trying to grow tobacco in a place that hasn't had it in 100 years. Warfighter, man. Good cigars. I can't wait to try some more of their product. It's a really good cigar. I think if the rest of the cigars live up to this, I think people need to be running out and grabbing Warfighter right away. The sampler sounds like a good way to go. I love when companies offer samplers.
Yeah, they've actually got a couple of really cool samplers. I know they've got one that is like a travel humidor that comes with a bunch of cigars.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, I've seen the travel humidor on the website. It's super baller.
yeah, it's kind of like Pelican case style. Um, and then they've also got a couple of samplers that come with cutters and stuff for people who maybe don't have all the accoutrements that go along with smoking.
Nice. Warfightertobacco.com. Check it out. I'm gonna wrap up my cigar here and then probably head inside because I am starting to freeze out a little bit as the weather starts. I think we actually just dropped down to about 34 degrees because I can see frost building up, which is just
Oh,
delightful.
yeah, that's always great.
But we appreciate everyone who tuned in live to this episode of Sharing Our Pairings. We will have this episode on YouTube earlier than we did last week. My bad. But make sure to check out Cigar Chat tomorrow night live, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard. Get your questions in, get your weasel on. And as we say on Sharing Our Pairings, we do want you to drink better, but we do want you to drink less.